Hi, folks. Thanks for your conversation in class this morning. It's Monday afternoon, and I wanted to get a brief video up for your consideration and to make some assignments with regard to postings for the two groups of three persons each for later on in the week. May have to send out some additional information to indicate how that's going to be done and when it's due. But I want to begin by talking a little bit further about the characterization of Noah this morning. We had an opportunity to talk about how in Ezekiel especially, but also in other biblical texts, Noah is recounted as being among what for Ezekiel are the three most righteous people who ever existed in the history of the world, citing these three ancient figures from the dim recesses of the past: Noah, Don Ale, and Job. I mentioned Don Ale this morning briefly. We know Don Ale as a character from the legend of Akkad. Now, we won't go into that, but that's a Ugaritic text, a Canaanite myth and legend that was popularly told, sometimes called the Bow. And the story of Akkad is about this superlatively righteous person named Akkad. And so you have these three or Daniel. You have these three righteous people, Noah, Daniel, and Job, all of whom are associated with the dim recesses of the past, the very ancient figures. Excuse me, I lost my picture there for a second. Dim recesses of the past who were so superlatively righteous that under normal circumstances, we had talked in class, their righteousness would be vicarious. They have meritorious righteousness so great that the mere presence of a righteous person like one of them would benefit the entire community. And we talked about certain texts such as Abraham bargaining with God about whether he could find 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Recall it starts at 50, whittles God down to 10, and one has the hunch that he could have gone even farther had he wanted to, but stops at 10. We talked also about the text in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 1, where you have the invitation, go throughout the land and see if you can find one righteous person. The implication being that if you can, I will spare the entire town. But you won't be able to find even one righteous person. So this theme of the meritorious and vicarious righteousness of superlatively righteous people, this seems to underlie the story of Noah and how Noah then is taken up as one of these figures in the book of Daniel. In the light of Noah's superlative righteousness, however, we had talked about the fact that in the end it really doesn't avail anything because the human condition hasn't changed, and whatever it was about the human condition, Noah's righteousness aside, it's God who has to make the change. But in light of the characterization of Noah, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of other texts. In chapter 9, verse 20, which is part of the text that we're going to be looking at, I'm going to have you look at later on this week, and Noah is referred to in 9:20 as an Ish Ha'adamah, as a man of the ground. And we know that that word Adamah has been a key, especially in the J tradition earlier on, the relationship of Adam and the Adamah, etc. And so what is it then that Noah, as a man of the Adamah, does in chapter 9, verse 20? He plants a vineyard. This is apparently the first introduction of viticulture in the history of the world. Noah is a vintner. And then, naturally, this sets up for the following story in which Noah proceeds to become drunk, and you have his sons discovering him lying naked in his tent. But it is not, notice, Noah who experiences any sort of censure in this whole thing. In fact, this text in 9:20, where Noah plants a vineyard and becomes drunk, this seems to be related in a way that is hardly ever noticed to another text in chapter 5, verse 28. And I invite you to check these texts out, have them in front of you as you're reviewing things. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 28, we have the populating of the earth, and we have Lamech, one of the ancestral figures, who gives birth to a son named Noah. And Noah then is named Noah from the root nuh, actually, which means to settle down, to come to rest. But this way the story has it in Genesis chapter 5:28 doesn't build at all upon that particular connectedness. It instead builds upon a play on a different word, which is similar sounding, but from a wholly different root. The Hebrew of the text says he named him Noah. It says, for he will bring comfort to us from the Adamah which God has cursed. So we recognize that language immediately also. God has cursed the Adamah. This is part of the language of the J story of the flood, so this is ancient language. But out of this cursed ground, it says Noah will bring comfort to us. The term that is used there is Yenachamenu. So Noah is called Noah because Yenachamenu, he will bring comfort to us from the Adamah which God has cursed. The root Yenachamenu, to bring comfort to, is wholly unrelated to the root Nuh, from which Noah, the name, comes. But it is the same term that is used of in Isaiah 40, for example, when it says, comfort, comfort ye my people. Nachamu, nachamu ami yomar aleichem. Comfort ye, my people, says the Lord your God. That this is the term, necham, which means to comfort, to bring comfort. So this character of Noah, from the very beginning spoken of as given his name because he will bring comfort to us from all of our toil and miserable labor. And he will bring that comfort to us from the very ground that God has cursed. And so that obviously is a reflection of Noah being the world's first vintner. This is a celebration of viticulture. And my wife and I are just about to go out on the porch before we have dinner this evening, and we're going to have a glass of wine. And we will toast Noah in the process for introducing us to one way to mitigate the misery and toil of the drudgery of our lives. Now, I mentioned that obviously Noah goes on to get drunk, but remember that it is not Noah who is punished, in a sense, for any of this. He's not censured at all in the story. He just gets drunk. That happens. It's part of being relieved of your daily misery and toil. It's rather his son, it's actually his grandson Canaan, the son of his son Ham, who is the one who is punished. And this cannot be read in any sense as some sort of a justification for the enslavement of the Hamitic races, as often was done in the history of Christian interpretation. It rather is an obvious political statement which seeks to claim that Canaan and the Canaanites are to be subject to the power of Shem, of the Semites. So it's simply a political propaganda piece in which the Semites are claiming control over the inhabitants of Canaan. Religious literature is always filled with these sorts of politically co-opted sorts of statements, drawing on stories that we read way too much into. So this story about Noah is fun, and I invite you to think through the connection of Noah as bringing us relief from the drudgery and toil of our daily lives. Now, in terms of the presentation that I would like each of the groups to talk about, I'd like to refer you to the reading guide that we have at the course site. It's not the Towner reading guide. It's the textual reading guide for Genesis chapters 6 through 9. And what I want to do is, because Genesis 9 is especially the priestly text relating to the conclusion of the flood narrative, I want you to take a look at the priestly narratives of the flood by focusing upon two questions in particular, and then a third one related to that. Questions 5 and questions 6 relate specifically to the issue of source critical issues and how we can sort through which of the texts, which of the story belongs to the J narrative, which of the texts belong to the P narrative, and what are the significant differences or nuances in the story that seem to characterize especially the priestly telling of the story. So, taking a look at questions 5 and 6, I'd like you in your groups to work through some of those texts, see what you can come up with regard to what biblical scholars have often said about these matters of which text belongs to which source and why, what it has to do with the theology of that particular school of thought. And then a third question that relates also then specifically to chapter 9 is question number 8 on the sheet, and that relates to Genesis 9 verses 1 through 17. And I'd like to call your attention especially to the issue of how it is that the rainbow serves as a sign of the covenant and for whose benefit the rainbow serves. I think I may even have my statement up there on an exegetical treatment of Genesis 9. If you poke around in the site, you may come across something like that. But I'd like for the group to discuss that also, because I think that question and that issue interjects another interesting angle in this story that has some, I think, interesting theological implications about how it is that this whole flood thing ends whenever we experience the threat of a divine vengeance once again in our lives. So your text, your text questions number 5 and 6 on that textual reading guide, along with question 8 for your groups to get together, spend some time looking at, and if then the group can just jot down what you found were some significant ideas that you found interesting, and I'll get back to you then on posting those to the forum groups in some way or other. Okay? So if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to get back to me, and I will look forward to reading your work, talking to you about these issues, and see you in class next Monday. Thanks a lot, folks, and have a great day. Bye-bye.